The lantern beneath the rain. The night was quiet, save for the steady silver threads of rain that draped the forest in a soft, shimmering veil. Somewhere deep among the pines, a light flickered. It wasn't the flash of lightning, nor the glint of hidden stars. It was the steady glow of a lantern, a small flame refusing to go out. A traveler named Mara moved along a muddy path, weary and alone. She carried only a worn pack and a heavy sense of loneliness that settled into her bones. The forest around her seemed to breathe softly, each gust of wind whispering secrets she could not understand. In the distance, through the mist, she glimpsed a cabin, or perhaps its ghost. She didn't question it, the forest had a way of offering comfort to those who sought it, even in the faintest glimmer of light. As she approached, the scent of pine thickened. The wind slowed, as if holding its breath, and the rain softened, tapping more gently on the leaves and her hood. The lantern hung beside a weathered door. Moss climbed the stones of the cabin, and faint smoke lingered in the air, though no fire burned within. Mara's hands trembled slightly as she knocked. The sound was dull, muffled by the rain. Silence. She tried again, softly. Still nothing. She turned the handle, and the door creaked open with a long sigh that seemed to come from the house itself. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old wood, a scent both comforting and strange. A single chair sat near the hearth. The lantern from outside now rested on the table, its flame steady but alive. Mara set her pack down and felt a small sense of relief she hadn't known for years. On the lantern glass, faintly etched words read, "To those who wander, rest easy. The flame will not harm you." She moved slowly through the cabin, running her fingers along the edges of tables and shelves, noticing the tiny jars filled with herbs, powders, and dried flowers. Old books lay stacked in corners, their pages swollen and soft from years of moisture. There was a rhythm to the place, a quiet pulse that seemed almost alive. Outside, the wind rose again, brushing the cabin walls. The trees swayed like dark giants murmuring secrets. The lantern flickered once, then steadied, as if breathing with her. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, time felt different here. Mara stared into the lantern's flame, letting her mind wander. Memories she had long buried surfaced, the laughter of a childhood home, the warmth of hands that were no longer there, voices she could no longer hear. The soft tapping of rain on the roof became a lullaby, soothing yet filled with a strange, unnameable tension. And then she heard it, a knock at the door. It was faint, almost mistaken for a trick of the wind. Then it came again, deliberate. 3 soft, rhythmic knocks, patient but deliberate. Mara's breath caught. She whispered, "Who's there?" No reply, only the rain. Her pulse quickened slightly. She approached the door, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The handle was cold beneath her hand. She hesitated, then turned it slowly. The door opened to darkness, but not empty darkness. The kind that moved in the corners of your vision. Shapes seemed to waver just beyond sight. The mist rolled in softly, curling around her ankles. Then, from the tree lean, a soft golden glow appeared, another lantern, swaying gently. Mara stepped forward, just enough to feel the rain again. The forest seemed alive with whispers, though no words reached her clearly. The second lantern beckoned faintly, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. But when she blinked, it was gone. She closed the door, heart thudding. The first lantern flared brighter for an instant, then returned to its calm rhythm. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady her racing thoughts. That night, she dreamed of water, endless rain spilling into still ponds, the reflection of the moon breaking apart in ripples. A figure stood at the center, holding a lantern that burned beneath the surface without extinguishing. Its face was hidden, outlined tall and motionless. When she awoke, the lantern on her table flickered softly. A faint voice whispered her name, Mara. She shivered. The voice was neither male nor female, it carried through the pines like the wind. The flame tilted, shimmered, and grew steady again. Days passed, though she lost track of them. The forest remained drenched. Food in the cupboards never spoiled. The fire never went out. Each night, soft tapping came at the window, always 3 taps. Sometimes she waited for hours, listening, imagining shapes moving just beyond the glass. One night she opened it and saw footprints leading into the forest. A shadow stood among the trees. It raised its hand and vanished. Mara closed the window, heart thudding, feeling simultaneously afraid and strangely comforted by its presence. Eventually, she found a small wooden token beside the lantern, etched with the same words as the glass. Outside, the forest looked different, brighter, though the sun hadn't risen. Mist curled low over the ground. She lingered, noticing the tiny droplets hanging from pine needles, the glimmer of the wet moss, the faint rustle of creatures hidden from sight. In the distance, a faint lantern glimmered near a still pond. She knelt by the water, seeing her reflection, but it blinked before she did, and then smiled. Her reflection extended a hand through the surface. A voice spoke from the water, "The flame remembers what the world forgets. You are the keeper." Trembling, she touched the water. Ripples spread, shattering the pond's surface, and the forest vanished. When she opened her eyes, she stood in silver mist. Lanterns floated around her, glowing softly. Each contained a shadow, a memory of something long gone. The figure from her dreams appeared, face obscured by lantern light. "The world forgets easily," it said, "but the flame remembers. You have walked the forgotten path." The lantern in her hand flared warmly. Within it, she saw her cabin, empty. Her footprints faded from the mud. She understood, the lanterns held souls not lost but resting. Now, during storms, travelers sometimes see a faint light swinging between the trees. If they follow it, they find the cabin, the flame burning still. And if they listen closely, a soft voice whispers through the rain, "To those who wander, rest easy. The flame will not harm you." Somewhere in that whisper, a name, Mara. The rain continues, endless and soft, wrapping the forest in silver sleep. The lanterns sway in rhythm, pulsing like the heartbeat of the world itself. Close your eyes, and perhaps you might hear it too, the hush of forgotten souls and the warmth of a flame that never dies. The house at Willow Creek. The fog clung to Willow Creek like a living thing, curling over the narrow path and twisting around the gnarled trees that leaned over the road. No sound came from the forest except the occasional snap of a branch and the rustle of wet leaves. It was the kind of evening that made time feel heavier, as if every step forward was measured by invisible hands. Henry had been driving for hours, trying to escape the city's relentless hum. His car's headlights barely penetrated the fog, revealing only shadows of trees that seemed to watch him as he passed. He hadn't meant to take this old road, it had simply appeared on a map he'd been studying, labeled in small, uneven letters, "Willow Creek, abandoned." He should have turned back, but the road beckoned with a strange certainty. There was a pull, a quiet insistence, like something waiting for him at the end of the line. Soon, he saw it, a house, half hidden behind a wall of mist. Its paint had long since peeled, leaving streaks of gray and brown. Windows stared blankly like eyes, some cracked, some dark and empty. The porch sagged, and the door hung slightly ajar, inviting yet ominous. Henry stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under his boots. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. Something about the house made him pause. It wasn't fear exactly, more a tugging sense that he wasn't alone, that someone or something was expecting him. Still, curiosity overcame caution. He pushed the door open, and it groaned as if the house itself exhaled. Inside, the air was cold and stale. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight, and dust motes floated in the thin beams of light from the windows. There were remnants of life here once, an overturned chair, a table with broken legs, photographs yellowed with age. The faces in the pictures seemed to watch him as he moved through the hall. One child with wide, dark eyes, a woman with a faint, knowing smile, a man whose expression was frozen in mid-laughter. Something about them felt wrong, as though the smiles were painted over sorrow. He reached the staircase and hesitated. A low wind whispered through the cracked panes, carrying with it a faint sound, almost a voice, barely audible. Henry strained to listen, and the whisper became a repetition of one word, leave. He swallowed, telling himself it was the wind. But when he stepped toward the stairs, the air grew heavier, charged with a presence he could not see. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, circling him like invisible fingers. Henry's pulse quickened. Something moved behind him. He turned sharply, but the hallway was empty. Only the portrait stared back. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched into darkness. The floorboard seemed to shift underfoot, subtle vibrations that felt almost like breathing. He moved forward, each step measured, the whispering growing into a low hum. The last door on the left was slightly open. From within came a faint yellow light, flickering like a candle. He pushed the door fully open. The room was small and bare, save for a single chair in the center, facing the wall. On the chair sat an old lantern, its flame bright and steady, though no one had touched it. The whispering stopped. In the sudden silence, Henry could hear his own heartbeat, drumming painfully in his ears. Then the chair moved. Slowly, deliberately, as if pushed by an unseen hand. The lantern's flame flickered violently, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Henry stumbled back. A chill swept the room. Behind the chair, written across the wall in deep scratches, were words he couldn't comprehend at first. Then they became clear, we remember. A cold weight settled on his chest. He turned to flee, but the door slammed shut. The hallway outside was gone. All that remained was the room, the chair, and the lantern, glowing with a strange intensity. The shadows on the walls began to twist, forming shapes, faces, bodies, reaching toward him with long, thin hands. Henry's mind screamed. He lunged for the lantern, thinking perhaps if he held it, he could dispel the shadows. The moment his fingers touched the cold metal, the room changed. He was no longer in the house. He stood in the middle of a dense forest, fog thick around him, the shadows now towering figures surrounding him silently. The lantern hovered in front of him, burning steadily, illuminating faces of children, men, and women, all frozen in anguish. A voice came, deep and hollow, echoing in his mind, "You see what was forgotten. You see what remains. Stay." Henry screamed, stumbling backward, but the figures advanced, silent and unrelenting. He ran blindly, the forest stretching endlessly. The fog thickened, and the lantern's light pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He tripped, falling to his knees, and the world tilted. When he looked up, he was back in the room. The chair and lantern were as they had been, but the words on the wall had changed, "You may leave, but you will remember." Henry bolted from the house, the door finally yielding to his frantic push. He ran to his car, hands trembling on the wheel, fog swallowing the road behind him. The house was gone. Only the road remained, silent, empty, and waiting. Years later, Henry would drive past old forest roads and wonder if he had imagined it. But sometimes, when fog rolls in thick and the night is still, he swears he sees a flickering light between the trees, just ahead of him. A lantern glowing steadily, and in its flame, the faces of those who never left Willow Creek, staring silently, remembering, waiting. The Midnight Caller. It started with a phone call. Not the kind of call that wakes you from a deep sleep, but one that lingers in your dreams. Emma had just settled into bed when her phone vibrated softly on the nightstand. The screen was dark, showing no number, only a small, pulsing icon. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello." Her voice was quiet, tentative. There was silence at first, then a whisper, low and rough, like dry leaves brushing together, "I can see you." Her heart skipped. She laughed nervously. "Who is this?" No answer. Only the faint sound of her own breathing, mingled with another, a second breath, slow, deliberate, coming from the line. Emma's hand trembled as she set the phone down. She told herself it was a prank, maybe a wrong number, but the chill that crept along her spine refused to leave. She turned off the phone and tried to sleep, but the whisper lingered in her mind. Then, just as her eyes closed, the vibration returned. She picked up the phone again. The screen was blank, no number, no text, only the call itself, ongoing, ringing in her hand. She answered, whispering, "Stop. Please." The voice came again, "I'm here." Emma's breath caught. Her room was dark, moonlight casting faint shadows on the walls. But she felt it, a presence, something watching, just beyond the edge of vision. She wanted to call for help, to run, but her body refused to move. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Every time she dozed, the phone would vibrate, and the voice would murmur words she couldn't quite hear, each one pulling her deeper into unease. Finally, just before dawn, the line went dead. Silence. Relief washed over her, and she fell into an exhausted sleep. When she woke, everything seemed normal. The phone sat on her nightstand, no calls, no messages, nothing unusual. She laughed at herself, shaking her head. It had been a dream, a nightmare born of exhaustion. Weeks passed. The calls returned, always at midnight, always from a blank screen. And with each call, the whispers became more coherent. The voice knew her name. It knew where she lived. It knew things no stranger could know. Emma became paranoid, sleeping with lights on, checking locks repeatedly, watching shadows as if they might move. One night, after yet another call, she noticed something new. On her bedroom wall, faint scratches had appeared, small and delicate, spelling a single word she had never seen before: watch. The air grew colder, heavy with unseen presence. Emma tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. Every dark corner, every flicker of movement in her peripheral vision, became a potential threat. The calls never asked for anything, never demanded, only observed. She moved out, thinking distance would help, but it followed. The same whispers, now through emails, texts, even random notifications on devices she didn't own. She sought help, psychologists, technicians, police, but each report vanished, as though no record of the harassment existed outside her memory. One night, alone in a hotel room, she received another call. She answered automatically, dread tightening her chest. The voice was calm now, almost soothing. "You cannot hide. I am everywhere you look. Everywhere you've been. I am the spaces between light and shadow, the moments you cannot remember. And soon, you will see me too." The line went dead. She sat frozen, staring at the dark screen. When she looked up, a shadow lingered at the far end of the room, barely perceptible, yet distinctly human. It didn't move, didn't breathe, yet she felt its gaze pierce through her. Emma screamed. The figure vanished, leaving only the echo of her voice and the lingering pulse of a presence she could no longer deny. From that night on, she never felt truly alone. Wherever she went, whatever she did, she knew it was there. Watching, waiting, always just beyond her perception. The calls never stopped, but now she never answers. She knows if she did, it would finally step fully into her world. And sometimes, when the night is still and the wind is low, she swears she can hear her own voice answering, faint and trembling, before the whisper returns, "I see you." The reflection in the lake. The lake lay hidden among the trees, shrouded in mist that clung to the surface like a living veil. Nathan had heard rumors in the nearby town, tales whispered in corners of diners and bars. People who had gazed too long into its waters vanished, leaving only ripples. Skeptical, he decided to see it for himself. Twilight stretched across the sky as he trudged through the muddy path leading to the lake. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves, thick and heavy, and every step seemed to pull him deeper into a place outside time. The fog coiled around his ankles, curling upward, obscuring the banks and trees. He reached the edge of the water and froze. The lake's surface was unnervingly still, reflecting the final shards of daylight like a perfect mirror. He leaned closer to examine his reflection, the contours of his face blurred by the mist above the water. For a long moment, he saw nothing unusual. Then, slowly, a blink, not his own. Nathan's breath caught. The eyes staring back held a glint that was sharp and knowing, alien to his own. A cold tremor ran through him. He leaned closer, and the reflection raised a hand, deliberate and slow. His stomach nodded. The whispering of the wind seemed to bend around him, carrying voices not meant for his ears. Join us, come, stay, forever. He stumbled backward. The shore seemed to stretch endlessly. Every step he took echoed unnaturally, and the fog thickened, swirling around him, tugging at his clothes, his hair, his very skin. His heart hammered in his chest as the lake's surface shimmered unnaturally. Shapes moved beneath the water, faint but unmistakable, shadows of limbs, faces contorted in silent screams, mouths opening and closing without sound. Nathan forced himself to breathe. He tried to rationalize, telling himself it was a trick of light, a reflection distorted by ripples. Yet the air grew colder, and the whispers became coherent words, soft but insistent. We remember you, you belong here, we are waiting. Panic mounted. He turned to flee, but the forest had shifted. The path back had vanished, replaced by dense undergrowth and skeletal trees twisting toward him. The lake's mirror-like surface stretched farther than should have been possible, infinite and impossible. He ran blindly along the shore, feet sinking into the mud, arms reaching for the fog itself as if it might hold him back. A ripple spread across the water. The reflection's face twisted, the smile widening unnaturally. Dozens of faces appeared, each more distorted than the last, all staring with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce Nathan's very soul. They began to move, the water rising slightly as if alive, fingers reaching toward him from beneath the surface. Nathan screamed and stumbled backward into the shallow edge. The ripples pulled him toward the center, as though the lake had a mind, a will. The shadows whispered now, their words almost tangible, you cannot leave. We remember. You are ours. He clawed at the muddy shore, but the ground gave way. The water closed over his hands, over his knees, and he felt the cold bite into him like ice sharpened to knives. Panic and exhaustion intertwined, dragging him under. The reflection's hand reached out, passing through the surface as though the water were no barrier. Nathan's fingers brushed the mirror, and the faces above multiplied, floating like dark lanterns in the mist. He struggled, screaming, thrashing, trying to escape the pull, but the lake's surface seemed to stretch farther with each desperate movement. His reflection leaned close, smiling wider, revealing teeth too perfect, too sharp, too human and yet not human at all. And then it spoke, a whisper that resonated in his chest, in his bones. The water remembers what the world forgets. And now, so do you. The fog thickened. Time collapsed into endless moments of screaming and silence. Then, abruptly, he was no longer in the water. Nathan stumbled to his feet on the muddy shore, soaked but alive. The lake looked normal again, still as glass, reflecting only the gray twilight and surrounding trees. No faces, no whispers, no distortion. Only calm. He ran through the forest, branches lashing at his face, roots tripping him, until he reached the main road. The town was silent, empty, as if the world had never noticed his absence. He returned home, but the lake never left him. In every reflective surface, windows, mirrors, even calm puddles, Nathan saw the blink that was not his own. And at night, in his dreams, he returned to the lake. Faces rose from the water, hands stretched toward him. The voice whispered endlessly, we remember. You are ours now, too. Even now, when he walks near bodies of water, he hesitates, heart hammering, because the lake waits, still and patient, ready to remind him that some mirrors do not merely reflect, they remember. The room above the attic. Claire had inherited her grandmother's house after her passing. It was an old, sprawling home, full of creaking floors, faded wallpaper, and the lingering scent of lavender mixed with old wood. Every corner seemed to carry a memory, though many had been long forgotten. Yet one part of the house had always been off-limits, the attic. A narrow, hidden staircase led up behind a false wall, and her grandmother's words echoed in Claire's mind, "Some doors are better left closed." The first night alone, curiosity gnawed at her. Shadows of the past seemed to stretch across the walls, and the soft sigh of the wind against the roof whispered her name. With a hesitant hand, she pressed against the false wall and felt the staircase behind it shift under her fingers. Dust rose into the air as she pulled the door open, revealing steps that twisted upward into darkness. Each creak of the stairs echoed in the silence, reverberating off walls that had not been touched in decades. At the top, she found a single door, black and unmarked, as though it had been waiting for her all her life. She hesitated, heart pounding. Finally, she turned the knob. The door opened, revealing a room smaller than she had expected, almost impossibly neat. A single desk sat in the center, facing the wall. On it lay a ledger, bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and brittle. Curiosity overtook fear. Claire approached, running her fingers along the cover. The handwriting inside was precise, obsessive. Names, dates, notes filled every page. Every name had a birth date and a death date, some spanning decades she could not recognize. Her chest tightened. She recognized one name immediately, a distant cousin lost years ago, and shivered as she flipped the page. Each entry chronicled lives no one else remembered. The missing. The forgotten. The lost. She tried to step back, but a cold weight settled on her chest. The air in the room thickened, almost viscous, pressing in from all sides. The ledger seemed to pulse beneath her fingers, alive. Then a whisper, dry and brittle, brushed against her ear, "You must record it, or it will forget." Panic surged, but the words resonated in her mind with an authority she could not resist. Trembling, she took the pen that had appeared on the desk. The moment she touched it, her hand moved as if guided by unseen forces. Names she did not know filled the pages, people who had vanished from town, travelers who never returned from the forests, children lost to the river. She tried to stop, but her hand would not obey. The whisper returned, more insistent, circling her mind, "Do not forget. Do not stop." Hours passed, though the light never changed. Time in the room moved strangely, like a tide that pulsed according to the ledger's needs. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but she did not notice. Her eyes stung, her muscles ached, yet the pen moved endlessly. The air seemed to thicken, shadows curling in corners, stretching toward her. Faces appeared briefly in the darkened edges of the room, pale and indistinct, watching. Some smiled faintly, others wept in silence. Suddenly, the desk shook. The shadows seemed to surge closer. A voice, low and commanding, echoed through the attic, "Do not falter. You are the keeper now." Claire's heart pounded. The temperature dropped sharply. Breath misted in front of her, and she could see shapes coalescing in the corners, figures of those whose names she had just written. They drifted silently, watching, waiting. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but the ledger demanded attention. Write. Remember. Keep them alive. Days or perhaps weeks passed. She lost track of time. Meals remained untouched, lights flickered on their own, the house seemed to breathe with her, sharing her every heartbeat. The whispers never ceased. Every name she wrote became a story, every story a life preserved, though at a cost she could not fully comprehend. One morning, neighbors found the house empty. Windows were open to the wind, the false wall concealing the attic staircase now perfectly closed again. The ledger was gone. Claire was never seen again. But sometimes, in the town, people noticed small anomalies, a missing child's toy appearing in the woods, a photograph showing someone no one recognized, a record of a person who had vanished long ago, inexplicably documented in local archives. The house remained quiet and imposing. Occasionally, curious visitors report hearing scratching sounds from above the attic, a pen moving across paper, a faint whisper, "Do not forget. Keep them alive." And some say, on stormy nights, if you press your ear to the wall, you can hear the scratching, steady and deliberate, and feel the weight of someone, or something, still writing, still remembering, and still waiting for the next keeper to arrive. The passenger in the back seat. Tom had been driving late on the highway for hours, the road stretching endlessly into darkness. He was exhausted from a long shift at the warehouse, the kind of fatigue that made his eyelids heavy and his thoughts sluggish. The hum of the engine was comforting, steady, until he noticed her, a woman standing at the side of the road, silhouetted in the dim glow of his headlights. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled and wet from the mist that had settled over the highway. She smiled faintly, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips that sent a chill down Tom's spine. Against every instinct, he slowed the car. "Need a ride?" he asked, voice wavering despite his attempt at casual concern. She nodded silently and climbed into the back seat. The door shut with a soft click, almost too quiet. Tom glanced at the rearview mirror. The seat appeared empty. He frowned, rubbing his eyes, but the faint outline of her form lingered. Minutes passed. Tom tried conversation, asking her name, where she was headed. No response. The fog outside thickened, clinging to the windshield, and the radio crackled with static, occasionally whispering faint, indistinct words. Tom laughed nervously, blaming his imagination, exhaustion, and the monotony of the drive. Then, a sudden chill filled the car. The hairs on his neck rose. He glanced back again. The seat was empty once more, yet he could feel her presence, impossibly close. A whisper drifted to his ear, "Do you see them?" Tom's pulse quickened. He checked the rearview mirror again, then spun around in his seat. The highway behind him was empty, barren, yet the back seat now held dozens of shadowed figures, faceless and silent. Their eyes were hollow voids, their limbs elongated and twitching unnaturally. The woman sat among them, smiling faintly, watching him with an intensity that made his stomach turn. Fear gripped him. He slammed the brakes, skidding on wet asphalt. The shadows vanished instantly. Only the woman remained, her eyes glinting in the faint interior light, her smile widening. The fog outside was dense, obscuring the road ahead, and for a moment, the car felt suspended in an endless void. Tom tried to open the doors. Locked. The windows wouldn't budge. The engine idled quietly, humming, but he felt trapped. The radio crackled again, the static forming into whispers, chanting his name. "You cannot leave. You cannot escape." The woman leaned forward slowly, impossibly close, her fingers brushing the top of the seat. Her voice was soft, almost seductive, yet laced with malice. "You see what we see now. You belong with us." Panic consumed him. He shifted into gear, trying to drive, but the road had twisted into something unnatural. The lines of the highway blurred, the trees leaning closer, their shadows stretching into inhuman shapes. The figures in the back seat reappeared, multiplied, reaching for him with long, thin hands. Their faces twisted in silent screams. Tom swerved violently, narrowly avoiding the guardrails. The woman's whisper followed him, echoing in his mind even as he fought for control. "Do you see us? Do you remember?" Hours seemed to pass in seconds. His headlights flickered, illuminating glimpses of the highway he thought he knew, only to vanish again into twisting shadows. Every time he glanced in the mirror, more figures crowded the back, their hollow eyes burning into his soul. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him. His car rolled to a slow stop on the side of the road. He dared not move. The fog was thick, and the night was silent except for the faint hum of the engine. The woman remained, seated upright, smiling faintly, watching. Tom could not breathe, could not speak. He felt the weight of countless unseen eyes pressing down on him. Then, as the first hints of dawn broke through the mist, the figures vanished. The woman's form dissolved into the fog, leaving only the echo of her presence, lingering in the back seat. Tom exhaled shakily, finally able to move, but the road stretched endlessly before him, and he felt certain it would never end. From that night on, he never drove alone at night. But sometimes, when the fog rolls thick across highways, or a rearview mirror catches a shadow too still to be his own, Tom swears he sees her, the passenger in the back seat, smiling faintly, watching, waiting, patient. And the whispers return. Do you see them? The forgotten train. Miles outside the city, where the tracks twisted through dense forests and empty fields, there was a station that few remembered. Travelers who tried to find it often failed. It was called by some locals the Forgotten Station, a place that appeared only to those who were meant to see it. Daniel had been driving home late one night when he noticed the faint glow of the station lights through the fog. His GPS gave no indication of a road or exit there, but exhaustion and curiosity pulled him in. The mist curled around the train tracks like smoke, hiding the platform from view until he was almost upon it. The station was deserted, silent except for the soft whistle of wind through the broken signs. A train sat on the tracks, ancient and blackened, windows opaque, smoke rising lazily from its chimney even though the world outside was damp and still. The doors creaked open, inviting. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct warned him not to board, yet he felt compelled. He stepped onto the platform. The wood groaned beneath his feet. The smell of old iron and coal filled his nose. The air was thick, humid, carrying a faint echo of voices, laughter, sobs, whispered conversations that belonged to no living person. "Hello?" he called, but the station swallowed his voice. The doors of the train opened fully. Inside, the cars were pristine, untouched by age, though a faint layer of dust suggested a long absence. Rows of empty seats lined the carriage. Candlelight flickered from sconces along the walls. Shadows danced, elongated and unnatural, though there was no wind. Daniel stepped in. The door slammed behind him. The train shuddered and began to move, silently, effortlessly, gliding along tracks that seemed to stretch into an endless night. Outside, the fog thickened, obscuring everything he had known. The seats filled gradually, almost imperceptibly. Figures appeared in the shadows, passengers in faded clothing, faces pale and hollow, eyes dark and endless. They stared at him silently. Daniel's throat tightened. He tried to speak, but no sound emerged. One of the passengers leaned forward. A man, or what had been a man, whispered softly, "We wait for those who forget." Daniel's mind raced. He had no memory of ever being here, yet a strange familiarity tugged at him. He tried to leave the train, but the doors were sealed. Panic rose. The figures multiplied, their eyes fixed on him, unblinking. They did not move toward him, they simply observed, and in their gaze, he felt the weight of decades, of lives long gone and stories unremembered. Hours, or perhaps centuries, passed. Daniel could not tell. The train moved through landscapes that twisted unnaturally, forests where trees bent impossibly, rivers that flowed upward, towns that shimmered and dissolved as he passed. The passengers whispered among themselves, faint words brushing the edges of his mind, forgotten. Remembered. Lost. Gone. A door opened at the end of the carriage. Light spilled in, golden, warm, but impossible in its purity. A woman stepped forward, her face familiar yet impossible to place. She extended a hand. "It is your turn to remember," she said. Daniel approached cautiously. The candlelight flickered over her features, and he realized with a jolt that she looked like himself, younger and untouched by fear. In that instant, he understood, the train held those the world had forgotten, waiting to reclaim their memories before vanishing entirely. He felt a pull toward her hand, a strange relief in surrender. He reached out. The moment their fingers brushed, the train shuddered violently. The lights flickered, the figures around him leaned closer, and the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. "Remember, remember, remember." Then, silence. Daniel awoke on the side of a deserted road, fog clinging to his clothes and hair. The station was gone. The tracks ended abruptly in a patch of grass. The train had vanished without trace. He stumbled home, unsure if it had all been a dream. But things had changed. Names, faces, and places he had long forgotten returned to his memory, vivid and impossible to ignore. The feeling of being watched never left him. On quiet nights, he swore he could hear the faint whistle of a train in the distance, and sometimes, in reflective surfaces, he glimpsed his own pale, hollow eyes staring back, waiting for the next stop. The forgotten train moves still, through mists and time, claiming those who have been erased by the world. And Daniel knows, as he listens to the distant whistle, that one day he may board again, whether he wishes to or not. The sound behind the walls. Lena had just moved into her first apartment, a small brick building on the edge of town. It was cheap, the kind of place where peeling wallpaper and creaking floors were the price of living alone. She didn't mind. She had a small desk, a cozy bed, and a view of the streetlights glimmering through the fog. But the first night, as she unpacked boxes, she heard it, a faint scratching, almost imperceptible, coming from behind the walls. She paused, tilting her head. The sound stopped when she held her breath. Then it started again, softer this time, like nails tracing the wooden studs. Lena shook her head, telling herself it was just the building settling. Old pipes, rodents, anything. She went to bed. The scratching continued. At first, it was intermittent, just a minor annoyance. But as the nights passed, it grew louder, deliberate. She could hear it even through the TV and music. It had a rhythm, almost like someone pacing, circling, waiting. One evening, she pressed her ear to the wall. The scratching stopped immediately, replaced by a faint whisper. At first, she couldn't make out the words. Then, slowly, clearly, it formed, "Come closer." Her heart pounded. She moved away, thinking she was imagining it. But the whisper returned, repeated, "Come closer, come closer." She couldn't sleep that night. The sound followed her into the bathroom, the kitchen, the bedroom. It was everywhere and nowhere, a presence pressing against her skin. Lena tried calling her friends, her family. No one understood. When she asked neighbors, they shook their heads. The building had been empty for months, they said. Only one tenant remained for a while, a man who moved out abruptly after complaining of strange noises. As the nights continued, the whispers became clearer, forming words that chilled her to the bone. "We are here. We've been waiting. You belong here." The scratching now sounded like claws, scraping across wood and plaster, circling her apartment in a slow, deliberate rhythm. She installed cameras, hoping to catch a burglar, a rat, anything. Nothing appeared on the footage. No shadows, no figures. Only empty rooms, quiet except for the faint, low scratching. One night, Lena awoke to a cold breeze. Her bedroom door was slightly open, though she had locked it. The scratching was right behind her bed, loud and insistent. She leaned over to look under the bed, nothing. When she straightened, she noticed movement in the corner of the room. A figure, indistinct, tall, and thin, pressing against the wall, almost blending into the shadows. The whisper came again, this time directly into her mind, "We see you. We are patient." Fear paralyzed her. She couldn't move. She could only watch as the figure slowly disappeared into the wall, leaving nothing behind except the echo of the whisper and the scratching, now retreating, circling, waiting for her to fall asleep. Weeks later, she found herself compulsively checking the walls at night, pressing her ears against plaster, following the rhythm of the scratching. It had a pattern she now recognized, like breathing, pulsing, alive. She realized the presence was not trying to harm her, at least, not yet. It was observing, marking, teaching her something she couldn't yet understand. One night, exhausted, she collapsed asleep on the floor. When she awoke, the apartment was empty. The scratching had stopped. The whispers were gone. For a moment, relief. Then, faintly, from behind the wall, she heard a single word, soft but clear. Waiting. Even now, months later, she sleeps with her ear against the wall, listening. Sometimes she swears she can hear breathing, counting, always counting, and she knows, she is never truly alone. The Lighthouse Keeper. Miles from the nearest town, perched on jagged cliffs, stood an old lighthouse. Its paint had long since peeled, the iron railing rusted, yet it still held a strange majesty, a sentinel over the endless sea. For years, the locals whispered about it, that previous keepers vanished without a trace, that some nights you could hear lanterns clinking and the sound of someone climbing the spiral staircase, though no one had lived there for decades. Some said the building had a will of its own, a consciousness shaped by decades of solitude and the obsessions of men who had lived and disappeared within it. Ethan, a young writer seeking isolation, rented the small keeper's cottage nearby. He wanted solitude, inspiration, a place to write uninterrupted. The lighthouse, looming like a silent guardian, both terrified and fascinated him. On his first night, a storm rolled in from the sea. Wind shrieked through the cliffs, rain pelted the windows, and the lighthouse groaned in the storm, as though sighing in expectation of a visitor. The storm seemed alive, a living thing that reached out to him, urging him toward the lighthouse. Around midnight, Ethan noticed a light flickering at the top. Confused, he hadn't been told it still worked, he grabbed his coat and climbed the cliff path. The wind tore at his clothes, rain soaking him to the bone, but he pressed on, compelled by something deeper than curiosity. The closer he got, the more he noticed subtle signs, footprints in the mud that seemed older than possible, shells crushed underfoot, as if someone had been waiting there for him. When he reached the lighthouse entrance, the door creaked open silently, as if expecting him. Inside, the spiral staircase wound upward, slick with rainwater tracked in from the storm. Each step groaned, resonating through the shaft like distant voices. As Ethan climbed, the temperature dropped sharply, his breath became visible, curling in front of him. Shadows stretched unnaturally, clinging to the walls, bending in ways that made the spiral seem impossibly long. At the top, he entered the circular room where the great light rotated. The lantern glowed steadily, casting long shadows across the walls. The floor was wet, streaked with muddy footprints that led to the railing and back, circling endlessly as though someone had walked in a perfect spiral, vanishing into thin air. A faint, metallic scent filled the room, mingling with salt and decay, and Ethan realized it was blood, faint, old, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. A whisper, almost drowned by the storm, echoed, "You see me now, you see me." Ethan's pulse quickened. He spun around. The wind rattled the glass panes, but no one was there. The footprints seemed to twitch slightly, like something under the surface. He leaned over the railing, peering into the churning sea. Waves smashed against the cliffs below, yet amidst the foam, he saw figures, pale, spectral, walking along the rocks, their heads bowed as if in mourning. He blinked, they vanished. He turned back to the room. Shadows pooled, twisting unnaturally, stretching along the walls like living things. Figures began to coalesce, tall, thin, spectral men and women, dressed in tattered keeper uniforms from decades past. Their faces were hollow, eyes empty, yet they radiated a presence, a weight pressing down on Ethan's mind, whispering memories that weren't his own. He staggered backward, tripping over a loose floorboard that creaked like a scream. The lantern flared suddenly, blinding him. In the reflections on the glass panes, Ethan saw countless versions of himself, pale, hollow-eyed, standing silently, watching. The whispers grew louder, forming words he could understand: "Join us, the light never dies, the lighthouse remembers." His knees buckled. He stumbled toward the railing, compelled by a force he could not resist. The shadows surged closer, stretching tendrils that seemed almost solid, brushing against his skin with icy touch. He tried to descend, but the staircase had changed. It spiraled impossibly high, curving into the ceiling, twisting back on itself like a labyrinth. The past keeper's whispers merged with the storm, echoing endlessly, names, dates, regrets, obsessions, madness. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, time seemed meaningless. Ethan could feel the pull of the lighthouse, the way it fed on isolation and desperation, twisting them into something eternal. He realized with a growing terror that the lighthouse did not merely trap its keepers, it remade them, folding them into its light, into the shadows, into the endless vigil that had consumed all who came before. Suddenly, the storm outside ceased. Silence pressed against him, heavier than the wind had ever been. The figures vanished. The staircase returned to its normal spiral. Yet in the reflections of the glass panes, Ethan saw them again, countless versions of himself and the past keepers, all watching, all waiting. The lighthouse had marked him. Now, he sits in the lighthouse each night, pen in hand, recording what he sees. Names of those who vanished, accounts of the sea, the storms, the figures in the mist. Sometimes he hears the storm outside, sometimes he only feels it, pulsing in the walls, in the shadows, in the light. Occasionally, he catches a glimpse of himself in the reflection, and for a moment, he is not sure if he is writing or being written, if he is the keeper or part of the lighthouse itself. And still, the locals whisper, sometimes the lighthouse flares even on clear nights, sweeping its light across the ocean. And if you watch carefully, you might see a pale figure at the top, staring at the horizon. A figure who never sleeps. A figure who whispers to those who dare approach. The light never dies, and neither do we. The shadow in the mirror. Mara had always been fascinated by mirrors. Not in the vain way most people were, but in the way they captured light, reflected space, and sometimes seemed to hold something else entirely, something unspoken. When she inherited her aunt's old Victorian home, she was enchanted by the ornate mirrors in every room. Each one framed with curling gold leaves, each one catching the sunlight in a way that seemed almost magical. The first few nights were ordinary. Mara unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, and admired the antique pieces her aunt had collected. But then she noticed it, a flicker, a movement in the mirrors that didn't match her own reflection. At first, she thought it was her imagination. A shadow passing behind her. A trick of the light. But the shadows grew more deliberate. One night, while brushing her hair in the bedroom mirror, she saw a figure behind her in the reflection. She spun around. Nothing. Only the bed, the dresser, the small cat curled in a ball on the floor. Heart racing, she looked back at the mirror. The figure remained, closer now, pale, distorted, almost human but not quite. Its eyes were hollow, empty voids that seemed to stare directly into her soul. Panic clawed at her chest. She covered the mirror with a sheet, but the sense of being watched did not leave. She awoke the next morning to find the sheet shredded, edges singed as if burned by some unseen heat. Every mirror in the house bore faint scratches along the edges, forming patterns she could not recognize, and the sense of presence had become oppressive, pressing in from every reflective surface. Days passed. The figure grew bolder, moving in the mirrors independently of Mara. She could see it pacing behind her in the hallway, crouching in corners, peering around furniture, always just out of reach. It whispered sometimes, though the words were barely audible, like someone breathing through a cloth, "I see you, always, always." Mara stopped using mirrors. She covered them all, turned reflective surfaces away, and tried to ignore the sensation of eyes on her wherever she went. But it followed. In polished silverware, in windows, even in puddles of water on the floor, the figure was there. Watching. Waiting. Patient. One night, as a storm raged outside, lightning illuminating the rooms in brief flashes, Mara awoke to a whisper louder than ever, "Join me." She sat up, heart pounding, and saw the figure in the small vanity mirror across the room. It was closer now, its features clearer. Its lips moved, though no sound came. The hollow eyes glimmered faintly in the candlelight. Terrified, she fled into the hallway, but the mirrors lining the walls now reflected more than her own panic. Figures appeared in each, dozens of them, pale and twisted, pressing toward her, whispering, beckoning. The hallway stretched impossibly long, twisting and bending as though the house itself had reshaped to contain her. Mara tried the front door, locked. Every window, sealed. She ran back to her room, tripping over the carpet, hands reaching out for something to hold, anything to ground her. She looked at the mirror, and froze. The figure was standing behind her now, its hand outstretched, fingers curling slowly, deliberately. She could feel the cold in the air intensify, seeping into her bones. It spoke again, this time in a voice she could hear inside her mind, low and resonant, "You cannot escape. Mirrors remember. Mirrors wait. And now, you will remember too." The house seemed to groan and shift, shadows growing longer, darker, pressing against walls, ceilings, and floors. Mara fell to her knees, trembling. She realized with a growing horror that the figure was not merely a reflection. It had existed all along, waiting in the spaces between the glass, feeding on the attention of those who gazed into it. Lightning struck nearby, and in that brief flash, Mara saw countless eyes staring at her from every mirror, each hollow and endless, filled with an intelligence that chilled her to the core. The figure's hand reached through the mirror surface, bending the glass impossibly, curling around her wrist. Mara screamed, tearing herself free, but the figure's presence lingered, now imprinted in every reflection she could see. Windows, mirrors, even the dark surface of her teacup bore the image of those hollow eyes, watching, patient. She fled the house at dawn, never looking back. The mirrors remained, covered, still, silent. But Mara knew they were never empty. Every time she passed a reflective surface, she felt the weight of eyes on her, the certainty of being observed, the knowledge that some reflections do not merely mimic reality, they remember it, they wait for it, and one day, they reach for it. Years later, she would hear of another house, far away, with mirrors that gleamed like the sun. People whispered about a figure that lingered in their reflections, pale and hollow-eyed, waiting patiently for anyone who dared look too long. Mara would shiver and whisper to herself, "I know that shadow. I have seen it, and it will never forget me." The Whispering Woods. For as long as anyone in the town could remember, the forest at the edge of the valley had been avoided. People spoke of it in hushed tones, warning children not to wander too far. It wasn't just the darkness or the tangled undergrowth, it was something else. Something that listened. Something that remembered. Eli had grown up on the outskirts of the valley, hearing the stories from neighbors and family. He had always dismissed them as superstition, tales meant to scare children. But curiosity has a way of bending even the most cautious mind. One autumn evening, with the sun low and the mist creeping along the forest floor, Eli decided to see for himself. The first steps into the forest were uneventful. The air smelled of damp leaves and pine, and the only sounds were the soft crunch of his boots on fallen branches. But as he went deeper, the atmosphere shifted. The shadows thickened, the trees bending in strange, unnatural angles, forming shapes that seemed almost human. The further he walked, the more he felt as if something unseen was following him, breathing alongside him. By nightfall, Eli realized he had lost the trail he thought he knew. The forest was silent, too silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, not even the cry of an owl. Just the sound of his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. And then he heard it, a whisper. Faint, almost imperceptible, coming from the darkness ahead. Eli. He froze. The name was unmistakable. His pulse raced. He scanned the trees. Nothing. He told himself it was his imagination, a trick of the mind. But the whisper returned, closer, multiple voices now, overlapping, Eli. Eli, come. Panic rising, he tried to retrace his steps, but the forest seemed to twist around him. Branches clawed at his clothes, roots tripped him, and every familiar landmark disappeared. The whispers followed, sometimes behind him, sometimes ahead, always indistinct, always urging. He stumbled into a clearing. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, casting the space in a gray, eerie glow. In the center of the clearing stood a tree unlike any other, blackened, gnarled, its roots curling like serpents across the ground. And beneath it, a figure crouched, motionless, pale in the dim light. Eli called out. The figure didn't respond. As he stepped closer, he noticed that it had no face, just smooth, featureless skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. The whispers intensified, now surrounding him, coming from every direction, making it impossible to tell which way was safe. We remember, we wait, you are ours. He turned to run, but the forest had changed. The path he had taken was gone, replaced by endless trees stretching in every direction. Shapes appeared in the shadows, dozens of them, pale and twisted, watching silently. They didn't move closer, but their presence pressed down on him, an unrelenting weight in his chest. Desperation drove him forward. He ran blindly, tripping, clawing through undergrowth, the whispers echoing in his mind. Do not stop, do not look back, do not forget. The voices carried a strange urgency, a force that seemed to bend his will. And then he saw it, the same faceless figure, now standing in front of him, impossibly tall, impossibly still. Eli fell to his knees, gasping, the forest stretching endlessly around him. The figure reached out, and the moment its fingers brushed his shoulder, he felt every memory, every fear, every forgotten detail of his life being recorded somewhere outside himself. The whispers became clear, almost tangible. We remember all who wander, and now, so do you. When he awoke, he was on the edge of the forest. Dawn broke, painting the trees in soft gold light. He had no memory of how he got there, only the echo of voices in his mind and the unmistakable weight of being watched. The forest seemed normal again, peaceful even, yet Eli knew it had not released him. Years later, he would return to the valley. Sometimes, walking at night near the edge of the woods, he swore he could hear the faint whispers again, calling his name. And sometimes, in the corner of his vision, he would see pale, faceless figures moving among the trees, patient, silent, waiting for those who dared to enter and forget. The whispering woods do not forget. And once they have noticed you, they will always remember. The room above. Jacob had never believed in haunted houses. As a skeptic, he scoffed at stories told by neighbors about strange noises, flickering lights, and objects moving on their own. So when he inherited an old, Victorian-style home from a distant relative, he saw it as the perfect opportunity to renovate and perhaps even sell for a profit. The house was imposing, its dark brick walls weathered with age. Windows, tall and narrow, reflected the fading sunlight, while the front door's brass handle gleamed ominously. On his first night, Jacob explored every room, checking the layout and making notes for repairs. Everything seemed normal, until he reached the staircase that led to the upper floor. The staircase creaked as he ascended, the sound echoing unnaturally. At the top, he noticed a door partially ajar. He didn't remember it on the floor plan. It was an old storage room, the kind that had likely been used for decades of accumulated clutter. Curiosity nudged him forward. He pushed the door open. The room was empty, except for a small, dust-covered trunk in the corner. As he stepped closer, he felt a sudden drop in temperature, the air growing thick and heavy. The faint scent of decay lingered, though nothing visible seemed to rot. He brushed the dust off the trunk and slowly opened it. Inside lay a collection of journals, all bound in cracked leather, yellowed with age. Jacob opened the top journal and began to read. At first, it seemed like mundane notes about daily life, chores, meals, repairs. But as he read further, he realized these were accounts of someone watching the family in the house, recording their actions in obsessive detail. Names, dates, personal thoughts, everything meticulously noted. The handwriting grew increasingly frantic, erratic, almost shaking on the page. A sudden sound made him freeze, a faint scratching, like fingernails on wood, coming from the ceiling above. He dismissed it as an old house settling. But the sound persisted, rhythmic, deliberate, moving slowly across the boards above him. Jacob set the journal aside and climbed a ladder into the attic. The moment he stepped inside, the air shifted. The temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible in the dim light. The attic was filled with old furniture, boxes, and mirrors leaning against the walls. One mirror, taller than the rest, reflected not only the room but something behind him, a figure, pale, elongated, standing just outside the circle of the attic light. He spun around. Nothing. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure had moved closer, impossibly so, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Jacob felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a weight pressing into his chest. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the floorboards beneath him. Suddenly, the attic floor groaned. One of the boards shifted slightly, revealing a narrow hole. From it came a whisper, soft and insistent, "Come down, it is safe, we are waiting." Jacob's heart raced, but curiosity, and a morbid fascination, pushed him forward. He descended into the hole and found a small hidden room beneath the house. The walls were lined with shelves, each containing journals like the one he had found upstairs. The whispers grew louder, coming from every corner, overlapping into a chorus of voices, echoing in his mind, "Remember, remember, remember." The room was filled with shadows, shifting and pooling in ways that made it impossible to tell their exact shapes. Jacob felt as though the shadows were alive, moving toward him, observing him, recording him. Each step he took seemed to trigger a ripple of darkness across the floor, like water disturbed in a still pond. He realized, with dawning horror, that the house was not just haunted, it was sentient. It absorbed memories, fed on curiosity, and recorded the lives of anyone who entered. The journals were not merely records, they were contracts, binding the observer to the house. Jacob tried to leave, but the shadows blocked every exit, their whispers now a deafening cacophony, "You are ours, you belong here, forever." The walls seemed to stretch and pulse, closing in, and the mirrors in the hidden room reflected countless versions of himself, pale, hollow-eyed, trapped in silent torment. Hours, days, or perhaps weeks passed, time had no meaning. The air thickened, almost viscous, pressing against his skin. The shadows began to move independently, rising from the walls to form vaguely humanoid shapes. Whispers turned into faint cries, desperate and pleading, echoing the screams of those who had come before him. Jacob felt as if he were being pulled in every direction at once, his own memories dissolving into the mass of voices surrounding him. When he finally awoke, he was lying in the main hallway, the house silent once more, sun streaming through the windows. The journals upstairs were gone. The attic was empty. But Jacob knew the house had claimed something from him, his certainty, his confidence, his sense of safety. Even his reflection in the mirror seemed altered, faintly hollow, the eyes darker than before, shadows lurking just behind the glass. Now, at night, he hears faint whispers through the floorboards, soft scratching above the ceiling, glimpses of shadows in reflective surfaces. Occasionally, he catches movement in the corner of his vision, pale figures, watching, waiting. The room above does not forget. It does not forgive. It never releases those who belong to it. And sometimes, when Jacob stands before a mirror, he hears a familiar whisper, closer and colder than before. "Come back, the room remembers, and so do we, forever." Even when he turns away, he can feel their eyes following, patient and eternal, waiting for the day he falters and returns, as all who are bound inevitably do. The house on Blackwood Lane. The house at the end of Blackwood Lane had been empty for years. Its windows were boarded, the paint peeling like curling skin, and the garden had grown wild, tangled with brambles and weeds. Neighbors said the previous owner vanished one night without a trace. Children dared each other to approach, adults whispered warnings about the things that lurked inside. But to Claire, a thrill-seeking photographer, the house was irresistible. She arrived at dusk, the autumn wind scattering dead leaves across the cracked pavement. The house loomed above her, shadows stretching long and uneven in the dying sunlight. Every step toward it seemed to amplify the silence around her. No birds sang, no insects chirped, just the soft, crunching sound of her boots on broken glass and gravel. Claire pushed open the rusted gate. The hinges screamed in protest. She raised her camera, snapping photos of the overgrown garden, the warped door, and the grim facade. The house seemed to breathe, the shutters rattling as though stirred by some invisible hand. A chill crawled up her spine, but curiosity pulled her forward. Inside, the air was thick with dust and mildew. The floorboards groaned under her weight. Faded wallpaper curled at the edges, revealing streaks of dark stains beneath. She explored cautiously, photographing each room, the lens capturing details she couldn't see with the naked eye, faint scratches along the walls, blotches that almost seemed like faces pressed against the plaster. The smell of damp wood and rot clung to her clothes. Each step felt heavier than the last, the silence pressing on her ears, as though the house were holding its breath. At the top of the staircase, she found a narrow hallway with a single door slightly ajar. Beyond it was a room frozen in time, a child's bedroom, toys scattered across the floor, a small bed with rumpled sheets, and a mirror on the wall. Claire approached the mirror, the air around it colder than the rest of the house. Her reflection shimmered oddly, as if the glass were rippling like water. A whisper came from behind her. She spun around. Empty room. The mirror now held another figure, a pale girl, her eyes hollow, standing silently beside Claire's reflection. She reached a hand toward the glass, fingers trembling. Claire's own reflection mimicked the movement, but she had not moved. Panic surged. She stumbled back, knocking over a small chair. The girl remained, expressionless, eyes fixed on her. Claire's camera slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. When she picked it up, the photos already taken were gone, replaced with images she had never captured, the girl standing in the shadows, figures emerging behind her from walls and corners, their faces obscured but watching. The room seemed to warp, walls bending, ceiling lowering, the temperature dropping sharply. The whispering grew louder, coming from every corner, every shadow. Stay, stay, stay. The toys began to move, rolling across the floor as though pushed by invisible hands. A lullaby played softly, though there was no source, and the bed sheets rose and fell violently, as if someone invisible were tossing and turning beneath them. Claire ran, stumbling into the hallway. Doors that had once led to empty rooms now opened into dark corridors that twisted impossibly, leading her in circles. The house seemed alive, responding to her fear, feeding on her panic. Every mirror she passed reflected not only herself but the pale girl, closer each time, eyes staring through her, beckoning. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, reaching toward her, crawling along the walls. She could feel them brushing her ankles, wrapping cold fingers around her wrists, tugging at her with patient insistence. The front door appeared, but when she reached for the handle, it dissolved into darkness. The whispering had grown deafening, voices overlapping. "Do not leave, we remember, we are always here," she screamed, pounding on the walls, but they flexed like skin, enclosing her in their suffocating embrace. The air thickened, making it hard to breathe, each inhale heavy and cold. The mirrors multiplied endlessly, reflecting countless versions of herself, all trapped, all screaming silently, all staring at the pale girl who now moved freely between the reflections. Time fractured. Seconds stretched into hours, hours into days, though Claire could not know. The house pulsed around her, breathing her fear, twisting her perception. Whispers grew intelligible, repeating memories that were not hers, names of children she had never met, birthdays she had never celebrated, rooms she had never entered. Shadows of past occupants flickered through the halls, some frozen in terror, others repeating daily routines, their faces blank and hollow. She realized the house recorded everything, absorbing the lives of those who entered and erasing them from the world outside. The pale girl moved closer, her hollow eyes locked on Claire. She extended a hand, and Claire felt an unbearable pull in her chest, a tug on her very essence. She tried to resist, but her legs moved involuntarily. Memories she had never lived flooded her mind, whispers of despair and longing, images of lives stolen by the house over decades. Every reflection screamed silently, eyes pleading for release, mouths forming words she could not hear. Walls rippled like water. The ceiling flexed and descended, brushing Claire's hair. She felt trapped in a liquid nightmare, the air thick with dust, decay, and a scent she could not name but knew belonged to those who had come before her. The mirrors now displayed rooms that did not exist in the house's real structure, long hallways lined with shadowed figures, staircases folding impossibly into themselves, doors opening into voids of absolute darkness. The house's consciousness pressed against her mind, probing, cataloging her memories, cataloging her fear. Her legs buckled, and she fell to the floor. The girl knelt before her reflection in the mirror, face almost human but void of warmth. Claire felt herself fading, her sense of identity stretching thin as the house whispered truths she could not bear. Names of the long-lost occupants, their secrets, their regrets, flowed into her mind, binding her to the house in ways she did not yet comprehend. When Claire finally awoke, she was outside, lying on the cracked pavement of Blackwood Lane. The house loomed above her, silent once more. Her camera lay beside her, intact. Photos of the house remained, but nothing hinted at the horrors inside, no traces of the girl, the whispers, or the shifting rooms. Yet Claire knew the house had claimed a part of her. Shadows followed her wherever she went, sometimes visible in the corner of her eye, sometimes only reflected in glass. At night, she could hear faint whispers on the wind, calling her name, beckoning her back. Mirrors in her apartment occasionally showed pale figures lurking behind her, waiting patiently. No one believed her. But she knew the truth, the house was alive, patient, eternal. It fed on fear, memory, and curiosity, and one day, it would have her again. And when that day came, she feared she would never leave. The wind along Blackwood Lane carried the faintest creak of floorboards, the sigh of doors opening on their own, and Claire, lying awake in bed, could feel the house watching, always waiting. Every photograph she took, every shadow she glimpsed, every whisper on the wind reminded her of the truth: some houses do not forget. Some houses never forgive. The lighthouse on Ravens Point. The lighthouse on Ravens Point had been abandoned for decades, yet it still stood like a sentinel over the jagged cliffs. Waves crashed violently below, and the wind howled across the rocks as if warning intruders away. Locals avoided the area, claiming the place was cursed, haunted by the last keeper who vanished one stormy night. They said if you entered after dark, you could hear the lantern spinning, though no light shone from the tower. Ethan, an urban explorer and writer of haunted legends, didn't believe in curses. He arrived one gray evening, camera and flashlight in hand, eager to capture the lighthouse for his next book. The path to the lighthouse was treacherous, slick with moss and scattered with broken branches. Each step sent echoes bouncing off the cliffs, making the wind seem almost alive, whispering warnings in a language he could not understand. The lighthouse's iron door was rusted shut, but a small window at its base had shattered long ago, leaving a jagged hole. Ethan squeezed inside. The air was thick with salt, mildew, and the metallic tang of rust. Dust floated in the faint light of his flashlight, and the spiraling staircase wound upward like a twisting spine. Every creak of the metal steps reverberated through the hollow tower, each echo stretching unnaturally as if the lighthouse itself had ears. He paused on the first landing, shining his light along the walls. Strange markings had been scratched into the paint, numbers, letters, and symbols that seemed to shift whenever he blinked. Whispers floated faintly on the wind, too soft to understand, but enough to make him shiver. He convinced himself it was only the wind, though a nagging fear crawled along his spine and made his skin prickle. Higher and higher he climbed, each step louder in the echoing shaft. Shadows pooled in corners, seeming to move of their own accord. The wind outside grew harsher, slamming against the lighthouse walls. Suddenly, the lantern room door creaked open, though he was certain he hadn't touched it. His flashlight trembled in his hands, and he swallowed hard, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. Inside, the lantern room was frozen in time. The brass railing was polished, the glass pane spotless despite decades of neglect. And there, in the center, stood the keeper's log, open on a small table. Ethan approached cautiously. The pages were filled with frantic writing, accounts of storms, ships lost at sea, and mentions of something watching from the waves. The last entry was a single line, written in jagged letters: "It knows when you climb. It waits." A cold gust of wind slammed the door behind him. The lantern above flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Ethan spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Yet he felt a presence, heavy, patient, waiting. The whispers returned, clearer now, and he could almost make out words: "Do not leave, join us, stay with the waves." Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a figure. A man, pale and soaked, as if he had risen from the sea itself. His eyes were black voids, and he reached a dripping hand toward Ethan. Panic seized him. He backed away, tripping over the railing, heart hammering. The figure moved silently, gliding across the floor, always keeping pace. Ethan grabbed the log and stumbled toward the staircase, but it seemed endless. Every turn revealed another shadowed landing, another glimpse of the figure watching from above. The wind howled through the cracks in the glass, carrying faint cries of long-lost sailors. His flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. He clawed at the stairs, desperate to descend, but the tower seemed to shift around him. Walls narrowed, ceilings lowered, stairs bending impossibly. The whispers became a chorus of voices, all calling his name, recounting moments of his life, secrets he had never told anyone. He realized the lighthouse remembered. It had absorbed the lives of everyone who had entered, keeping them in its eternal spiral, binding them to its history. The pale figure loomed above, then suddenly vanished. Ethan found himself in the lantern room again, the log open before him. The writing had changed. New lines appeared, describing his climb, his fear, his heartbeat, as if the lighthouse itself recorded his very thoughts. He realized with terror that this was no ordinary place. It fed on the living, binding them into its story forever, and all who entered became part of its memory. A scream tore from his throat, echoing endlessly in the tower. The lantern above spun on its own, casting a blinding light that reflected infinitely in the panes. Figures emerged from the shadows, past keepers, sailors, explorers like him, pale, silent, trapped in the lighthouse's memory. One reached for him. Then another. And another. Ethan fell to his knees, clutching the log, trying to scream. But the lighthouse swallowed him. Darkness became all-encompassing. When he tried to move, he felt cold water beneath him. He was lying on the slick rocks outside the tower, wind tearing at his clothes, the ocean roaring below. The lighthouse loomed above, silent once more. His camera lay beside him. Photos captured the lighthouse, the cliffs, the crashing waves, but nothing hinted at the horrors inside, nothing of the shadows or the whispers. And yet, every time he looked into a reflective surface, he could see them, pale figures, watching him, waiting, their black eyes fixed upon him. He thought he had escaped, but nights were worse. In dreams, he climbed the spiraling staircase endlessly. Every mirror reflected dozens of himself, all trapped, all screaming silently. The lighthouse whispered to him across miles, carried on the wind, "We remember. We wait. You belong." The memory of the sea haunted him. On quiet nights, the sound of waves became voices, recounting centuries of torment. Shapes appeared in the corner of his vision, fleeting glimpses of those trapped within the lighthouse. He could feel them reaching, waiting for the moment he would return. Sometimes, when he walked along the cliffs, he thought he heard footsteps behind him, matching his own. He turned, but only the wind met his gaze. At home, objects shifted slightly. Doors he swore he had locked opened on their own. The shadows in mirrors stretched longer than they should, and whispers followed him, echoing faintly even in crowded streets. No one believed him. He knew the truth: the lighthouse on Raven's Point was alive, patient, eternal. It fed on curiosity and fear, and one day, it would have him again. And when it did, there would be no escape. The wind along Raven's Point carried the faintest creak of floorboards, the sigh of doors opening on their own, and Ethan, lying awake in bed, could feel the lighthouse watching, always waiting. Every photograph he took, every shadow he glimpsed, every whisper on the wind reminded him of the truth: some places do not forget. Some places never forgive. The ocean's waves were no longer just water. They were memory, breath, and hunger, each one pounding against the cliffs like a warning. Ethan understood that some stories never ended, they merely waited for the next chapter, and the lighthouse, patient and eternal, would write it. The Forgotten Asylum. The asylum had stood abandoned for decades, perched on a cliff above the crashing sea. Its windows were shattered, iron gates rusted, and locals whispered of patients who vanished without explanation and doctors who conducted forbidden experiments. They said that if you lingered near its walls after sunset, you could hear whispers, footsteps echoing, and sometimes the faint scream of someone trapped forever. Dr. Adrian Cole, a writer and documentary filmmaker, was drawn to the asylum not by superstition but by curiosity. He had explored countless haunted locations, confident that fear was imagination's trick. Armed with a flashlight, camera, and notebook, he arrived on a gray afternoon. The cliffs were slick with rain, waves smashing against jagged rocks. A cold wind cut through his jacket, carrying salt and decay. It tugged at his hair and moaned through the empty windows, as if the asylum itself were breathing. The gates groaned under his touch, revealing a courtyard overrun with weeds. The asylum loomed above, windows like hollow eyes. Each step on the cracked stones echoed unnaturally. Adrian paused, sensing the building's silent awareness, a presence waiting. Every shadow seemed to shift subtly, following him, a darkness that moved with intent. Inside, the air was thick with rot. The grand foyer, once magnificent, lay in ruin. Chandeliers hung precariously, coated in dust. The floor was warped and cracked, shadows pooling in corners with no light source. Adrian's flashlight swept over faded murals, landscapes warped by decades of decay. The smell of mold and rust clung to the walls. A faint scratching echoed from above, though no wind blew through that part of the building. Hallways led to patient rooms, therapy offices, and administrative offices. Each space frozen in time, overturned beds, toppled chairs, scattered papers. On a small desk, a case file for Clara Montrose caught his eye. Her notes were frantic, cryptic, the eyes in the walls, whispers that steal the mind. Pages were torn and crossed out. A strange smear of something dark coated the corner of one page. As he explored, the asylum seemed to twist unnaturally. Staircases appeared where they shouldn't, doors led to impossible rooms. Shadows moved at the edges of his vision, and footsteps echoed behind him. When he turned, the hallways were empty, but a faint breathing followed him, slow and deliberate, matching his heartbeat. By nightfall, the temperature dropped sharply. Fog seeped through broken windows. Adrian set up his camera, documenting the halls. Every frame shifted subtly, shadows where none had been, figures glimpsed briefly, vanishing when looked at directly. The whispers began at midnight. At first faint, then forming words: "Do not leave, stay with us, never leave." Adrian's heart raced. He tried to dismiss it as the wind, but the whispers grew into voices, overlapping, filling each room, soft at first, then rising like waves crashing over his mind. He discovered the records room, shelves of patient files intact and crumbling. Accounts of experiments, unethical treatments, and unexplained disappearances filled the pages. Final entries repeated the same outcome: missing patients, empty rooms, staff unable to explain. One page was covered entirely with the word "observed" in multiple handwritings. The letters seemed to squirm slightly on the page when he blinked. Suddenly, the temperature dropped further. Doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. Shadows coalesced into human shapes, pale and indistinct. Adrian backed away, but the room stretched endlessly, walls bending as if alive. The whispers became a chorus, calling his name, echoing footsteps from every direction, layering over each other until it became impossible to tell which voice was his own. Panic seized him. He ran, but the asylum had changed. Doors led to unfamiliar rooms. Stairs looped endlessly. Shadows formed faces, mouths opening in silent screams. The whispers clawed at his mind, exposing fears he had never voiced. The asylum had learned him, feeding on his fear, reshaping the halls around his terror. In the grand hall, a warped mirror caught his eye. His reflection multiplied, dozens of pale versions staring back. They moved independently, gesturing for him to stay. The whispers now came from the mirror: "Join us, be part of us, belong." Each reflection whispered secrets he had never told anyone, memories of pain, shame, and regret, drilling into his mind. Adrian's flashlight flickered, and shadows surged. Figures emerged, past patients, doctors, visitors, their faces featureless, hands reaching. He tried to scream but no sound emerged. The asylum had consumed his voice. Time lost meaning. Hours or minutes passed, the asylum became a labyrinth of twisting hallways, looping staircases, and rooms filled with memories of those it had claimed. The whispers grew louder, enveloping him, echoing through his mind. The asylum didn't merely haunt, it captured fear, despair, the very essence of those who entered. In one corridor, he glimpsed a figure kneeling in prayer. As he approached, it dissolved into smoke, leaving a faint smell of burned hair and mildew. Elsewhere, a patient's old cot rocked violently, though no one sat on it. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly, as if the asylum were alive, watching, waiting for him to falter. In the main atrium, a dark, shifting presence revealed itself, pulsating like a shadow with many eyes. It spoke directly to his mind: "You sought the truth, now you are ours. Your fear sustains us. Your mind belongs here." Adrian fought to escape, pushing through the labyrinth, desperate. But the asylum was relentless. Every door led back to the same rooms. The missing emerged from walls, reaching, pleading silently. Their despair and rage clawed at him, filling every corner, crawling under his skin. A staircase appeared where none had existed, leading to a room filled with mirrors. Each reflected a different version of himself, screaming, crying, lifeless. He realized every visitor became trapped here, their fear etched into walls, carried in shadows. Hands brushed against his back, cold and insistent, pulling him toward a mirror. Adrian broke free, stumbling down the hallway, but the whispers followed, repeating his name, recounting his fears, dredging up memories long buried. The asylum had become sentient, feeding on memory, extracting terror, reshaping reality around him. As dawn approached, fog lifted outside. Adrian stumbled out of a side door, collapsing on wet grass. The ocean roared, waves smashing against cliffs. He was free, or so he believed. But the asylum remained. Shadows lingered at the edge of vision. Whispers followed in the wind. In mirrors, pale versions of himself appeared, trapped in an endless loop of fear. Photographs showed dark figures lurking in corners. The asylum's presence lingered, patient, eternal. Adrian left Raven Hollow, yet he knew the truth: the asylum was alive. It fed on curiosity and fear, and one day, it would have him again. And when it did, there would be no escape. The wind along the cliffs carried the faint creak of doors opening, floorboards sighing, and voices speaking in unison: "Welcome home." 7. The Vanishing Motel. The motel appeared suddenly on the desert highway, a flickering sign glowing in the twilight. It had been decades since anyone reported it open, yet the lights burned, windows reflecting the empty road. Travelers who approached spoke of the eerie quiet and the feeling of being watched, though no one was ever visible. Legends told of people who checked in and were never seen again. James, a lone road tripper, had been driving all day, exhausted and anxious. The sky darkened with storm clouds, and the asphalt shimmered from rain. The motel seemed like salvation, a place to rest and wait out the storm. As he pulled into the gravel parking lot, the wind carried an unnatural chill, tugging at his hair and clothes. The sign above the entrance flickered rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. The lobby was empty, pristine yet decayed, as if frozen in time. A bell sat on the counter, polished and gleaming despite the dust. Keys hung behind the counter, numbered and neatly arranged, some with small, faded photographs taped to them. James approached, unsure of what compelled him. He picked a key labeled Room 7, and the door creaked open, revealing a room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and mildew. The furniture was outdated, the bed neatly made. He set down his bag and explored cautiously. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, time seemed wrong in the motel. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching as he moved. In the mirror, he thought he saw another figure standing behind him, vanishing when he spun around. The hum of fluorescent lights became a low whisper, "Stay, forever." Every breath felt heavy, as though the air itself resisted him. Curiosity overcame fear, and James wandered the endless hallways. Every door he opened led to rooms identical to the one he first entered, yet subtly twisted. Photographs changed, showing unfamiliar people with hollow eyes, their faces twisted in terror. Faint noises echoed, footsteps that matched his own, laughter that abruptly stopped. He began to hear murmurs, like recordings of past guests whispering warnings. By midnight, he realized he could not find the lobby. Hallways twisted impossibly, looping back on themselves. Rooms multiplied endlessly. Shadows detached from the walls, following, reaching, as if the motel itself were alive, feeding on his fear. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive air, leaving only a pounding heartbeat echoing in his skull. In one room, a typewriter sat on a desk, a sheet half filled with a single sentence repeated over and over, "They never leave, they belong here." James felt the words crawl under his skin, echoing in his mind. Footsteps followed him endlessly, sometimes soft, sometimes thunderous. The whispers became voices, layered and overlapping, reciting secrets from his past, dredging up every regret, every fear, every failure he had buried. The clock in the lobby showed 3:33 a.m., though James had no memory of arriving there. He tried the front door, but it led only to another hallway. Windows showed the desert outside, yet the landscape shifted, mountains appearing where none existed, lightning flashing in impossible patterns. The motel's lights pulsed, flickering in sync with his heartbeat. Eventually, he discovered a hidden staircase leading to a basement. There, dozens of abandoned luggage pieces were stacked neatly. Some contained items belonging to previous guests, clothing, journals, cameras, even photographs of people staring directly at the viewer with terrified eyes. The walls were covered in scratches, spelling, "Do not leave, stay, forever." A faint, metallic smell hung in the air, mixing with dust and decay. Suddenly, a door slammed, and shadows surged from the corners, reaching toward him. James ran, his legs heavy, as if the building resisted him. Hallways stretched endlessly. Doors led only to more rooms, more shadows, more whispers. He realized the motel was alive, a predatory entity that trapped those who entered, feeding on their fear, keeping them suspended in a nightmare between reality and the unknown. Dawn broke, and James stumbled outside. The storm had passed. The desert was empty, the motel nowhere in sight. He ran for miles, desperate to escape, but every highway he drove seemed to curve back toward where he had parked. At nightfall, he swore he saw the flickering neon sign in the distance, calling him back. Deep in his mind, he knew the vanishing motel would never let him go. The shadows, the whispers, the impossible hallways, they would return, patient and eternal. And if he ever slowed down, even for a second, the motel would claim him. Forever. The lighthouse keeper. The lighthouse stood alone on the jagged cliffs, its paint peeling, metal rusted, and windows shattered by decades of storms. Locals whispered of strange lights at sea, and the disappearances of previous keepers, some found weeks later, dazed and incoherent, others never found at all. Sailors claimed to hear wailing from the tower on moonless nights, and the fog that rolled in seemed unnaturally thick, swallowing entire stretches of coastline. Evelyn, an amateur historian and photographer, had always been drawn to isolated places. She volunteered to stay overnight in the lighthouse, hoping to document its eerie history. As she approached, the wind howled like a chorus of ghosts, whipping waves against the cliffs with terrifying force. The air smelled of salt and decay, and the fog rolled in thicker than she expected, swallowing the path behind her. The door groaned on rusty hinges as she entered, the lantern inside swinging slightly though no one had touched it. Dust covered every surface. Old logbooks lay scattered across the counter, alongside nautical charts yellowed with age. She ran her fingers over the pages and found entries of a previous keeper, detailing strange visions, noises, and voices calling from the sea. One final entry was hastily scribbled: "They watch from below. I cannot leave." As night fell, the wind carried whispers, unintelligible at first, then forming words: "Do not look, do not leave, join us." Evelyn climbed the spiral staircase to the top, each step creaking under her weight, echoing like footsteps following her from below. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly, the paint cracking as though the building were alive. At the top, she peered out at the ocean. Moonlight revealed ships in the distance, but their outlines were warped, skeletal, with no crew aboard. The fog thickened, and she could hear voices over the crashing waves, pleading, screaming, sometimes laughing. Then she noticed a figure standing on the rocks far below, a pale silhouette, unmoving, watching her. When she blinked, it vanished. The lighthouse lantern flickered erratically, casting shadows that moved independently along the walls. She turned toward the spiral staircase and saw fleeting glimpses of figures climbing behind her, pale and distorted. Their mouths opened in silent screams. The voices in the wind became louder, chanting in rhythm with the lantern's swing: "Stay, stay, stay." Evelyn tried to descend, but the staircase seemed to stretch endlessly. Every step brought her back to the top. The fog swirled outside the windows, forming shapes of missing ships, drowned sailors, and previous keepers who had vanished. She realized the lighthouse wasn't just a building, it was a prison for those who dared enter, feeding on fear and curiosity alike. Desperate, she smashed a window to escape, but icy wind and dense fog slammed her back into the tower. The voices whispered directly in her mind, recounting memories, fears, regrets, every secret she had ever kept. Shadows pressed against her, pushing, shoving, a weight she could not bear. In a small storage room, she found remnants of previous keepers, clothing, journals, even a pair of shoes still worn as if recently used. One journal fell open, the pages filled with frantic writing: "Do not climb, do not look, do not listen. The sea claims all who linger." A cold hand touched her shoulder, and she spun around to see nothing, but the room had grown impossibly larger, the walls bending outward, ceiling stretching into darkness. Hours passed, though time felt meaningless. The lantern flickered one final time, revealing ghostly figures all around, their eyes hollow, mouths agape, reaching for her. The fog outside pressed against the windows like water, the ocean's roar amplified into screams. She screamed, but no sound emerged. The lighthouse consumed it all. At dawn, Evelyn stumbled outside, the fog lifting to reveal a normal coastline, sun glinting on calm waves. The lighthouse appeared smaller, ordinary. But she knew better. Its presence lingered in her mind, in shadows at the edge of her vision. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the spiral staircase stretching endlessly, the ghostly keepers watching, the fog thickening, waiting for her to return. The lighthouse was patient, eternal, feeding on those who dared to climb its steps. And someday, it would call her back. Always, it waits. The Forgotten Carnival. The carnival had burned decades ago, leaving only charred tents, twisted metal, and broken rides. Locals avoided it, claiming the ghosts of performers and visitors lingered. Strange music sometimes floated on the wind, laughter echoing where no one walked. People who entered reported being disoriented, seeing rides move on their own, and figures flickering between human and something else. Alex and his friends, thrill seekers and urban explorers, approached at dusk. The forest around the carnival was unnaturally quiet, the air thick with the scent of smoke and rot. They climbed over a fallen fence and entered. The ground was littered with ashes, broken glass, and the rusted skeletons of rides. Yet, faintly, lights shimmered as if powered by some unseen force. Inside, the Ferris wheel creaked slowly, moving despite the lack of wind or machinery. The carousel spun, horses rocking up and down. Laughter echoed from the tents, high-pitched and distant, as if coming from 1,000 children at once. Alex shivered. The carnival seemed alive, and aware of them. They explored further, cameras in hand. Each tent revealed twisted remnants of carnivals past, sideshow posters with missing performers' faces scratched out, games with prizes that appeared and vanished. Shadows moved independently, forming human shapes, then distorting, stretching across tents and rides. Whispers carried through the wind, stay, play, never leave. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time seemed to warp. In one tent, mirrors reflected not the explorers but people they didn't know, screaming silently, pressing against the glass. The figures shifted as Alex moved, following him, vanishing when directly looked at. The music became louder, hypnotic, pulling at his mind. A funhouse appeared that had not existed moments before. Inside, hallways twisted impossibly, rooms multiplying endlessly. Shadows pressed against walls, floors, ceilings, reaching, whispering their fears back at them. Alex realized the carnival trapped memories of those who entered, feeding on fear and joy alike. The figures in mirrors were trapped, unable to escape, their terror etched into the carnival's fabric. Desperate, Alex and his friends fled, but every exit led to another ride, another tent, another room filled with distorted laughter and whispers. The shadows became more aggressive, touching them, freezing them with icy fingers. One friend vanished entirely, pulled into the darkness, leaving only a scream that echoed endlessly. By dawn, Alex stumbled into the forest. The carnival behind him appeared burned and empty, the Ferris wheel toppled, tents torn. Yet in his mind, the music, laughter, and whispers lingered. He knew the carnival waited, patient and eternal, ready to reclaim anyone who wandered near. And in dreams, he saw the lights flicker, heard the call, play, stay, forever. The hospital basement. The hospital had closed abruptly after a series of mysterious deaths. Authorities cited contamination, yet rumors spoke of experiments, disappearances, and screams in the night. Locals avoided the building, claiming shadows moved behind boarded windows, and whispers carried from the basement, even during daylight. Daniel, a freelance journalist, was drawn to the building. He slipped past the barricades one night, flashlight in hand. The lobby was still furnished, dusty, eerie, frozen in time. Hallways stretched endlessly, peeling paint revealing years of neglect. He descended to the basement, where the air grew damp and cold. A metallic smell lingered. The basement was a maze. Rusted gurneys lined the walls, surgical instruments scattered, and walls were scrawled with frantic messages, "Do not go further, they are watching." Shadows moved independently, shapes twisting in corners. Daniel's flashlight flickered, and he heard faint moans and whispers calling his name. Rooms appeared and disappeared, doors leading to new corridors. Footsteps echoed behind him, matching his pace. In one chamber, he found records of missing patients, journals describing horrors, experiments conducted without anesthesia, voices of the dying preserved in recordings. Each entry ended with, "Do not leave," you cannot escape. Daniel tried to ascend, but the stairs twisted, leading him back to the same room. Shadows pressed against walls, floors, ceilings, whispering his fears. He saw figures trapped in rooms, reaching, screaming silently, their faces twisted in agony. He realized the basement consumed all who entered, keeping them as part of its eternal nightmare. Hours passed, though he could not measure time. Desperate, he ran blindly, only to discover new chambers filled with previous explorers, their eyes hollow, mouths moving in silent terror. The walls pulsed, breathing, alive. The basement wanted him, feeding on his fear, reshaping reality. At dawn, Daniel emerged, disoriented, finding the hospital appeared abandoned and ordinary. But the whispers lingered in his mind, and shadows followed him. He knew the basement waited, patient and eternal, ready to trap anyone curious enough to enter. 11. The Cabin in the Snow, True Horror Story, TTS Max Length. The cabin was isolated in the mountains, buried under a fresh blanket of snow. Locals warned that the area was cursed, that travelers who sought shelter often vanished. The trees groaned under the weight of snow, and the wind carried voices that seemed to whisper from within the ice. Mia sought refuge during a blizzard, stumbling upon the cabin. Inside, the air was still, almost too warm compared to the freezing outdoors. Signs of previous visitors appeared, footprints in fresh snow leading from room to room, clothing frozen into icy patterns, meals left half-eaten. Shadows flickered in corners, impossible to fully illuminate. Night fell, and the blizzard worsened. The cabin seemed alive. Doors opened to rooms that hadn't existed before. Figures appeared briefly in windows, pale, staring silently. Whispers called her name, recounting her fears, regrets, childhood memories. Every mirror reflected scenes of previous victims, frozen in terror, pleading silently. Mia tried to leave, but snow piled against the doors instantly. She was trapped. The cabin seemed to watch, testing her fear. Shadows pressed against walls, and footprints appeared inside the snow-covered rooms, though she was alone. The whispers escalated into screams, the cold intensifying, freezing her thoughts. Hours passed. She discovered remnants of those lost, clothes, journals, photographs. The cabin kept them, feeding on their terror. She ran through hallways that twisted impossibly, doors looping back, rooms multiplying endlessly. The storm raged outside, yet the cabin's interior warped reality, preventing escape. At dawn, the blizzard cleared. The cabin appeared small, ordinary. But Mia knew better. The snow outside was undisturbed, yet inside, the whispers lingered, shadows moved just beyond sight. The cabin waited, patient, eternal, and she knew one day it would claim her fully. 12. The Train to Nowhere, True Horror Story, TTS Max Length. The train appeared only at night, on an abandoned track in the middle of nowhere. Its whistle echoed through valleys with unnatural timbre, and the lights glowed faintly, beckoning the curious. Those who boarded rarely returned, and passengers swore the train's interior shifted, looping endlessly through darkness. Liam, drawn by curiosity, stepped aboard. The cars were empty, yet the hum of movement suggested others were present. Windows reflected dark forests that changed with each glance. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, rust, and something rotten. Whispers called his name from every direction. He explored the train. Doors led to impossible cars, hallways looping back. Figures appeared and vanished, passengers from other eras, their faces pale, eyes hollow. Voices whispered secrets and regrets, dredging every memory. The conductor was never seen, yet Liam felt its presence, observing, shaping reality around him. Hours, days, or minutes passed, time lost meaning. Each car contained echoes of past accidents, twisted versions of events, screaming passengers preserved in shadow. The train seemed sentient, feeding on fear and curiosity, each loop growing darker, longer, more twisted. Desperate to escape, Liam tried doors and windows, but the train refused release. Every attempt returned him to the same starting car. Whispers layered, forming a chorus of lost souls. You cannot leave, you belong. Figures pressed from walls, floors, ceilings, their screams silent yet deafening in his mind. At dawn, he awoke outside the train, standing on empty tracks. The train had vanished. The landscape appeared normal, yet every shadow, every whisper, hinted it waited, patient and eternal, ready to reclaim those who dared board. Liam knew, deep down, he would see it again, its whistle calling him into the endless night. The cabin in the snow. The cabin was isolated in the mountains, buried under a fresh blanket of snow. Locals warned that the area was cursed, that travelers who sought shelter often vanished. The trees groaned under the weight of snow, and the wind carried voices that seemed to whisper from within the ice. Mia sought refuge during a blizzard, stumbling upon the cabin. Inside, the air was still, almost too warm compared to the freezing outdoors. Signs of previous visitors appeared, footprints in fresh snow leading from room to room, clothing frozen into icy patterns, meals left half-eaten. Shadows flickered in corners, impossible to fully illuminate. Night fell, and the blizzard worsened. The cabin seemed alive. Doors opened to rooms that hadn't existed before. Figures appeared briefly in windows, pale, staring silently. Whispers called her name, recounting her fears, regrets, childhood memories. Every mirror reflected scenes of previous victims, frozen in terror, pleading silently. Mia tried to leave, but snow piled against the doors instantly. She was trapped. The cabin seemed to watch, testing her fear. Shadows pressed against walls, and footprints appeared inside the snow-covered rooms, though she was alone. The whispers escalated into screams, the cold intensifying, freezing her thoughts. Hours passed. She discovered remnants of those lost, clothes, journals, photographs. The cabin kept them, feeding on their terror. She ran through hallways that twisted impossibly, doors looping back, rooms multiplying endlessly. The storm raged outside, yet the cabin's interior warped reality, preventing escape. At dawn, the blizzard cleared. The cabin appeared small, ordinary. But Mia knew better. The snow outside was undisturbed, yet inside, the whispers lingered, shadows moved just beyond sight. The cabin waited, patient, eternal, and she knew one day it would claim her fully. The train to nowhere. The train appeared only at night, on an abandoned track in the middle of nowhere. Its whistle echoed through valleys with an unnatural timbre, carrying over the hills like a summons to the lost. The lights glowed faintly, beckoning the curious. Those who boarded rarely returned, and the few who did told stories that made no sense, stories of endless hallways, rooms that twisted reality, and passengers who weren't quite alive. Liam, drawn by curiosity and disbelief, stepped aboard one misty night. The doors closed behind him without a sound, sealing him in. The interior seemed normal at first, polished wooden floors, brass fittings, upholstered seats, but the air was heavy, thick with smoke, rust, and something far fouler he could not place. A faint, metallic taste lingered on his tongue. He could hear whispers, calling his name softly from the shadows between the seats. The train moved, yet outside the windows the landscape twisted unnaturally. Forests appeared where there should be open plains, rivers ran uphill, and stars blinked out of alignment in the sky. Each glance revealed fleeting figures on the tracks, pale and distorted, vanishing the instant he tried to focus. The air grew colder with each passing moment, and the hum of the engine pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Doors led to impossible cars. Each seemed to contain fragments of past horrors, dining cars with meals set but rotting, sleeping cars filled with shadows of passengers frozen mid-movement, laughing and screaming all at once. Hallways looped endlessly, bending reality so that no matter where he ran, he returned to the same starting point. The whispers intensified, layered with screams, chanting, murmuring secrets only he could understand. He saw figures clearly now, passengers from other eras, wearing clothing long out of fashion, eyes hollow, mouths frozen in silent terror. They stared directly at him, sometimes moving closer when he blinked, vanishing when he looked again. A mirror reflected a car with dozens of these figures, pressing against the glass, reaching, but the reflection outside showed only the empty train. The conductor was never seen, yet his presence was undeniable. He felt watched, manipulated. Signs flashed in the corners of the windows, numbers, names, dates, some familiar, some impossible. The train seemed aware of his thoughts, feeding on his curiosity, his fear, shaping the cars and hallways to trap him deeper into the nightmare. Time fractured. Hours, minutes, even seconds lost meaning. In one car, Liam saw a table with newspapers describing accidents he didn't remember, with his own name written in bold. Doors led to darkened cars where screams echoed from every surface, walls appearing to breathe. Shadows pressed through ceilings and floors, their hands stretching impossibly long, trying to pull him into the darkness. He tried to escape by opening windows, but outside was not the world he knew. Endless tracks twisted into impossible loops, fog thickening and swirling into grotesque shapes, faces, hands, screaming mouths, eyes that followed him. Every attempt to flee returned him to the same car, the same impossible hallway, with the whispers now chanting in unison, "You cannot leave, you belong here, forever." The train accelerated unnaturally, the engine groaning, shaking the cars violently. The lights flickered, revealing rooms filled with the memories of everyone who had ever boarded, faces pressed against glass, frozen in terror, spectral echoes of screams repeating endlessly. Liam's mind fractured under the weight of visions, relatives long dead, strangers missing from the news, shadows of himself he did not recognize. Hours, or what felt like days, passed. Exhausted, he slumped into a seat, the whispers now indistinguishable from his own thoughts. The train seemed to laugh through the air, a deep, resonant hum that shook his bones. Outside the windows, the landscape became a blur of impossible geometry, trees bending backward, rivers looping into themselves, skies burning with unnatural colors. Then, suddenly, he awoke outside the train, standing on an abandoned stretch of track. The night was calm, stars shining normally, the wind carrying no whispers. The train was gone, leaving only faint rails fading into the darkness. Yet in his mind, the sights, sounds, and whispers lingered. He could still feel the spectral hands brushing against him, the voices murmuring his fears, the oppressive weight of time trapped inside the cars. He knew, deep down, that the train to nowhere waited for him. Patient. Eternal. And that one day, if curiosity or weakness drew him near the tracks again, it would return. Its whistle would sound, eerie and hypnotic, and the cars would open once more, ready to claim him for its endless journey, never to let go. He could feel it now, just at the edge of perception, calling. And he knew the next time, he might not escape. The train appeared only at night, on an abandoned track in the middle of nowhere. Its whistle echoed through valleys with unnatural timbre, and the lights glowed faintly, beckoning the curious. Those who boarded rarely returned, and passengers swore the train's interior shifted, looping endlessly through darkness. Liam, drawn by curiosity, stepped aboard. The cars were empty, yet the hum of movement suggested others were present. Windows reflected dark forests that changed with each glance. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, rust, and something rotten. Whispers called his name from every direction. He explored the train. Doors led to impossible cars, hallways looping back. Figures appeared and vanished, passengers from other eras, their faces pale, eyes hollow. Voices whispered secrets and regrets, dredging every memory. The conductor was never seen, yet Liam felt its presence, observing, shaping reality around him. Hours, days, or minutes passed, time lost meaning. Each car contained echoes of past accidents, twisted versions of events, screaming passengers preserved in shadow. The train seemed sentient, feeding on fear and curiosity, each loop growing darker, longer, more twisted. Desperate to escape, Liam tried doors and windows, but the train refused release. Every attempt returned him to the same starting car. Whispers layered, forming a chorus of lost souls, you cannot leave, you belong, figures pressed from walls, floors, ceilings, their screams silent yet deafening in his mind. At dawn, he awoke outside the train, standing on empty tracks. The train had vanished. The landscape appeared normal, yet every shadow, every whisper, hinted it waited, patient and eternal, ready to reclaim those who dared board. Liam knew, deep down, he would see it again, its whistle calling him into the endless night.